and it stayed idle for 8 years.
With the fall of the Soviet Union, the Antonov Design Bureau was facing bankruptcy. In order to stay in business without government money, they turned to their fleet of giant airliners.
We began marketing the main aircraft in our fleet, the Антонов 124, which allows us to carry outsized and heavy cargo.
Creating Antonov Airlines, they formed a partnership with a London-based company that handles the booking of orders, scheduling and flight routing. Together, they filled a niche using the Antonov's ultra-jumbo jets that no one else could. Their major Western competitors use 747s, but they aren't large enough to handle bulky, outsized cargo. Before long, the Antonov was transporting everything from power station generators to motor racing crews, cars and equipment to points all over the world.
Oh, it's pretty well a case of you name it, we've carried it. Personally, my favourite is the railway locomotive that we took complete from Canada to Ireland a few years ago. That set a world record for the largest commercial payload. It was 109 tonnes. The sort of psychological concept of putting a railway engine in the aeroplane is well, mind-blowing.
Cargo is airlifted when it's not possible to transport it by ship. Many locations are landlocked, or in some cases the local roads are not large enough or strong enough to accommodate enormous loads travelling to and from ports. The aircraft also buys time.
Time is money in any project, and the aeroplane allows you to buy time. If you plan to use the aeroplane from the beginning of your project, you can use the time that the aeroplane has bought you in your shipping schedule from the end of the project at any stage during the life of the project. So you can buy additional design time, you can buy additional testing time, you can buy additional production time. So you know, there's a plus side to using the aeroplane quite often.
Planning is crucial when the cargo is oversized or overweight. Computers help determine how the cargo will be loaded in the aircraft. And plotting the route can be challenging. Flying huge cargo drinks up a lot of fuel, and several refueling stops are usually required. It all starts with an old-school trick.
Initially, we do use a globe, a piece of string, and so if I was going from, say, the United Kingdom over to India, then I could see from that straight line or great circle route that we would be operating through just the Ukraine, over through Iran, into Pakistan and India, so we could select our technical stops from that simple bit of navigation.
The technical stops are for refueling.
The airplane, because it's so big and fat, has quite a lot of drag attaching to it. That means it needs a lot of power, and that means it tends to burn a lot of fuel, and the fuel is the most expensive item. We'll burn, depending on the part of the world that we've picked the fuel up in, we'll burn $4,000 or $5,000 worth of fuel every hour, guaranteed.
Transformed from a giant of the Cold War to a commercial giant, this aircraft is ready for the rigorous reality of hauling heavy cargo around the globe.
Well, one of the major hurdles is actually the diplomatic clearances. A lot of the countries that we fly over or into need to be assured that we're not going to have any difficulties, and so that generally requires a bit more time in preparation. And normally we need about 14 days advance notice of any flight before we can actually operate that flight. The sheer weight of the aeroplane does cause, not concern, but does require a lot of planning. We have to take into consideration the bearing strength of the runway, and maybe that's okay for the Antonov 124, but not for the 225.
The ground operations can cause problems too.
We also have to consider the fact that the wingspan of the aeroplane is 84 metres and there are 6 engines, so fully laden with fuel, there is quite a severe bend in the wings, and we have to make sure that we've got all the clearances in place for the airfield so we don't hit the obstructions on the sides of the runways.
Remarkably, the biggest aircraft in the world don't need the biggest runways in the world. These jets can touch down in limited spaces. The 124 can even land on grass fields, making the aircraft popular in Africa. Its size can also save lives. It once packed 452 Ethiopian refugees into its bulk and flew them to safety. By the late 1990s, the company was receiving requests to carry loads weighing more than 150 tons, which was the maximum carrying capacity of the Antonov 124.
We gained enormous experience in the commercial service and operation of the 124, and we came to the conclusion that there is a range of even bigger cargoes than the 124 can hold.
Opportunity was calling for the 225 and its massive capacity. But it was rusting in a nearby field. The company managers realized perhaps it could fill the demand of lifting mega loads.
All of this heavy cargo can be easily carried by the Antonov 225, and management of our company chose to refurbish this aircraft after years of being grounded.
The Antonov design team decided to return the airliner to the skies, and they set an ambitious goal. The mighty Antonov 225 would make its second debut at the Paris Air Show. But after sitting idle for 8 years, the 225 would need extensive restoration before it could fly again. Suddenly, it was déjà vu all over again, as the original builders, designers and pilots of this massive craft were called upon to get it ready for its resurrection.
Now we are facing the problem of certifying the aircraft. We plan to certify it for civil purposes, which means we have to replace some military systems with civilian ones for safety reasons.
The decade-old aircraft had to be treated like it was brand new because the 225 had never been certified. It had never been proven safe to fly. Earlier flights, even the one with the Soviet shuttle on its back, were all military test flights. Now, this giant needed even more trials to prove it met international aviation standards before it would receive certification for commercial flight.
The main part of the certification was done in 1989, but after the Soviet Union collapsed, the process was stopped. So there are about 8 to 10 flights left to finish certification, and we are going to do those flights and get the certification for this aircraft.
The jet also needed to be brought up to date. Engineers installed modern navigation and telemetry equipment and a new Honeywell communication system. The aircraft flies with a crew of 17 and their cabins received upgrades. New, stricter noise regulations had to be met, and incredibly, the aircraft had to be strengthened.
We had to reinforce the primary structure, especially the floor and nose section of the fuselage, so that the aircraft could be able to transport the large and heavy cargoes weighing up to 250 tons.
Every one of these improvements would prepare the big jet for the work ahead.
There is special ground maintenance work now in progress before our first flight after its long stay on the ground.
The 225 received 6 new Ukrainian-built engines that together produce over 300,000 pounds of thrust, or 1.5 million newtons. For maximum lift and range, the jet must carry 280 tons, or 288,000 litres of fuel, an amount that would fill over 6,000 average-sized cars. The 225 needs a lake of fuel. It burns it at the staggering rate of 18 tons an hour. And depending on the weight of the load, it has a potential range of over 12,000 kilometres. That's the distance between New York and Hong Kong. Before any pilot makes this big bird stretch its 88-metre wingspan, he must prepare for some of the idiosyncrasies of flying such a craft.
Of course, there are some difficulties, moments a pilot must be prepared for. For example, the big wingspan means there are moments that the aircraft resists acceleration.
The wings are so enormous they effectively must lift themselves first and then the aircraft. Consequently, any change in flight speed can be tricky for the crew. And the high-rise cockpit means that the pilot is perched so high in the air during landings that what he sees isn't necessarily what he gets.
There are difficulties with landing big aircraft, like the 124 or Boeing 747. The same thing happens here on the 225. For example, the eyes of the pilot are about 10 meters off the ground when landing, so he has to rely on instruments to land instead of what he sees.
Maximum takeoff weight for this muscular jet is a staggering 580 tons, the equivalent weight of 8 Boeing 737s lifting off. But big aircraft do not need big pilots to fly them.
No, it's quite curious. Everyone who sees the aircraft for the first time has asked me that question. It seems there should be a big man, a big pilot, to operate this big aircraft. But actually, any pilot, large or small, who receives training could operate the 225. It doesn't require a big pilot.
Sometimes, though, a wide palm or an extra helping hand is required to throttle up all 6 engines at once. Within a year of rescuing the 225 from the scrap heap, the plane was ready. But could the jet that had been created for Cold War competition be reborn as a capitalist tool? Now it was time for the 225 to prove itself again with a test flight. Over $20 million had been spent upgrading the Antonov 225. And in April 2001, after being grounded for 8 years, the 6-engine Goliath powered up and lifted off on its second maiden flight. With the world's largest cargo plane flying again, the Antonov Design Bureau made plans to take every advantage of the 225. The aircraft's potential is not just the weight of cargo it can carry, but the size of that cargo. Its 43-meter-long hold could swallow up the entire fuselage of a Boeing 737. Engineers are now studying the 225 as a possible way to move 737 airframes to and from various manufacturing plants thousands of kilometers apart. And the jet is unique in that it can carry cargo on top, as it did with the Soviet shuttle. Being designed now are aerodynamic modules that will ride on top of the aircraft where the shuttle used to go. These will carry items too bulky for the 225's immense cargo hold.